Hello, folks. Hi, everyone. All right, let's just give it a second here for everyone to trickle in. Okay, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight or this afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We have folks from all over in California and Texas and Nebraska and DC and New York joining us. So thank you for being here. Very quickly, I think all of our emotional bandwidths have been tested deeply for a very long time now. And a lot of things to think about and at home here, and of course now in the world too. But for me, I try to channel that into feeling positive about something or someone. And so for me, I look forward to these events because it gives me a person to feel inspired by, and it makes me feel hopeful about our future. So I hope that this adds a little spark of something to feel hopeful about in your week. So for folks who haven't yet, please go ahead and flip on your camera so we can feel a little bit more intimate together here. When you have a question, just go ahead and please stick it in the chat box. Bear with me, we'll get to as many as we can. We want to be respectful of Greg's time and all of yours as well. But we are so thrilled to have Greg Casar running in Texas's 35th congressional district here with us tonight, and he's eager to answer your questions and dig in more. So stick in your question in the chat box whenever you can. While we don't charge a ticket fee for these events, because we really want you to hear from the candidate first and then make a decision if you want to chip in. We do hope that if you're inspired by Greg tonight, that you will chip in what you can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Taylor. Stephanie?
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to everyone for joining our call tonight. And before we start tonight, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the brave people of Ukraine and the very brave anti-war protesters in Russia. I know a lot of us are thinking about them right now. This is a very scary moment for the world. We're in a real fight for democracy against fascism. And I very much hope that the conversation tonight gives us all some respite and some hope. And so to get started, let me now introduce Greg Casar, who is running for the open blue congressional seat in Texas. The election date is March 1st, so there's a real urgency to this race. There's a chance to bring a remarkable progressive into Congress. And I, for one, feel very grateful when we are on such a tight timeline that Greg was able to make the time to join us tonight and to talk to all of you. Greg is a member of the Austin City Council. He is a former community organizer. He's the son of Mexican immigrants. He came to electoral politics much the same way I came to electoral politics, as a union organizer who realized the importance of changing who holds power and who has the ability to make laws. He's part of a new generation of left leadership. I think that he's going to be an important leader for many decades to come. I think he's going to be a very important voice in Congress, and I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. So now let me please give a very warm welcome and turn things over to Greg Casar.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you all so much for hosting me. I've really been looking forward to this. I just got off of the doors, knocking on doors in the community where a lot of folks do feel beat down by not just these last couple of years, but maybe even longer than that, especially in a place like Texas, where we felt not just our lives under constant threat, but people's rights under constant attack by our state government and by our governor. But it's these races and these moments, even in the darkest of times, where we can sort of try to restore some faith in our democracy and try to make democracy work for us. And we have to do that in places like Texas, where abortion rights are virtually banned in our state for working class people, where when people were freezing in their homes during a winter storm last year, people like Ted Cruz got on a plane to go to the beach but everyday people in Texas came together to actually take care of one another and to believe in one another and to rely on each other. And it's that spirit that we're really trying to channel in this campaign to make people's lives better, not just in my district and not just in my state, but we know we need that for the entire country, because progress is not for just some place far away from Texas. It actually has deep roots here in our state with Emma Tenayuca and the radical pecan shellers union with Cesar Chavez, who marched on our first street here alongside workers at the Economy Furniture Store who struck for weeks and months because of wages under $1 an hour. There are deep roots here in Texas that we need to reawaken. And really, I think a majority of people, not just in my district, but in my state, who believe in a $15 an hour minimum wage, who believe in Medicare for all instead of GoFundMe's to pay for life-saving medication, who believe in baseline things like reproductive rights and good union jobs for all and tackling the climate crisis. We have to be a place that does all of those things, especially here in the heart of fossil fuel, in the place where we see so many robber barons moving to Texas to avoid progressive taxation that we need to have in places like my state. And so I'm just so grateful for all of your support here in the last few days of the race. As Stephanie mentioned, I come from community organizing. I never thought I'd be running for elected office, but I was working as an organizer alongside custodial workers, restaurant workers, and construction workers especially. My summer job was being an organizer, and then made that my full-time work and life commitment, where we would try to push my city council, which was all Democrats at the time, to guarantee workers basic rights to things like a water break. And we encountered resistance even to that kind of thing. Big corporations standing up, trying to block laws for water breaks, trying to gaslight the community and saying, well, we already give water breaks. That's why we're opposed to laws for water breaks. And that through those sorts of moments of hypocrisy, we actually rebuilt a broader progressive coalition for working class people in this city, took on City Hall, and sort of sprungboard from some of those wins for me to run at the age of 24 for city council, was elected the youngest person ever to serve on the city council and didn't stop there. We kept Planned Parenthoods open in my community when Republican legislatures passed law after law trying to shut them down. My first time standing up to our police department was when survivors of sexual assault found and told the truth that there was a decades-long backlog of sexual assault evidence that was trying to be pushed under the rug. We refused to pass a city budget until there was a plan to clear all 4,000 of those untested rape kits. Our city said we had a living wage policy, but we had union members making as little as $7.25 because they were categorized as temporary or seasonal or part-time, even if they were working round the clock and had worked for the city for years. Drove that to $15 an hour, doubling that minimum wage in just 3 years. And then took on the state government and passed things like the first ever paid sick days law in the South. Knowing that they would come after my city in Austin, we built coalitions in Dallas and San Antonio to pass those laws that I authored in all of those cities at once. But in the middle of the pandemic, our all Republican Supreme Court blocked our paid sick time law when people needed it the most. And so instead of giving up and just saying, well, I guess that's the way it's going to be, the answer to that is to say, I'm going to run for Congress so that we can pass paid sick time, not only for every Austinite, but for every Texan and every American, alongside paid parental leave, alongside Medicare for all, alongside the PRO Act, so that people can have power that has in so many ways lived within our communities, but isn't represented in the United States Congress. And so that spirit is catching on in this race. And I would love any bit of help that you can give. An independent poll was just released a few days ago that put us at 42%. And the good news is that's double digits over everybody else. The bad news is it's not 50%. And in Texas, you need 50% to avoid a runoff. So we have just 5 days to make up that difference. And that's what we're doing at the doors. That's what we're doing on the airwaves to get just a few more people out there to vote so that we can win it without a runoff. And at that point, I will take 2 days off and then get right back to work. That's my weekend. I'm finally looking forward to a weekend, March 2nd and 3rd, to come back and actually keep organizing for the general election, because my district is one of the lowest turnout, not just in the state, but in the country. Black and brown communities that need to be turned out to vote to transform our state's politics, to be able to sort of evangelize progressive politics for this year's full elections because we're the first primary in the country. And we've heard so much doom and gloom about how progressives are on the run this year. And that's not what I'm finding in my district. That's not what I'm finding in the community. And if we can really, make a statement that progressive values are popular and will win in these first primaries in the country, my hope is that that has a ripple effect to all of the other races that y'all are working on and care about throughout the year. And so that last little nudge, we are ahead. We don't want to wind up in a runoff where dark money groups can come in and try to take us down. We have that momentum, and just that last push to get 50% would mean so much. So I'm so grateful for all the work y'all do, not giving up in these really hard years, and just really appreciate y'all inviting me here today.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you. All right, we have some questions in the queue. So we are going to start with Jane. Jane Fleming. Jane, can you please unmute yourself, and will you share with all of us where you're joining us from? And please ask Greg your question.
Okay. Hi, Greg. I'm Jane Fleming from Middletown, Connecticut. I have lots of family that is living in Texas, but I have been concerned since that deep freeze that you had a few years ago and your grid failed as to whether or not anything has been done to effectively reassure people that that couldn't happen again. Because with climate change, we are all having terrible storms that were unlike anything we've ever had before. And I feel Ted Cruz and his wealthy cronies got out of town quickly to keep their families warm, but didn't care much about the citizens left behind.
It was an awful thing that happened here. It's hard to really state to folks just how disturbing the whole thing was. As city council members, the work coming forward from it is like, how do we establish shelters and have generators and backup water, which is critically important, so important. But we have to get to the root causes of what caused this in the first place. And it was the privatization of our grid, the dominance of the Republican Party, that are going to cause these sorts of things again in the future. But to just give you a sense of it, I mean, we had constituents who didn't have water for weeks. We set up a whole brigade of people with pickup trucks. These put a post out there, who's got a pickup truck? We got 1,200 people to sign up, and we hauled water from breweries because they could boil water and make sure it was clean, to apartment buildings where people came out with pots and pans just to have water to drink. Being able to take a bath was a luxury. We had volunteers of people who were bringing their cars to people's houses because if there were people on ventilators or who needed medical equipment to run, we were making sure that people stayed alive by plugging things into cars and making sure there were people that had spare gasoline to keep people alive. That's the situation we were in. I had constituents who died of carbon monoxide poisoning from running their ovens to stay warm or burning furniture. I mean, just hard to really express how horrific the whole thing was. And what the legislature did was they passed some laws to weatherize some plants, but they wrote the biggest loophole for natural gas suppliers you could ever imagine. And one of the companies, natural gas companies that profited the most from the storm, their CEO cut the governor a $1 million campaign check just days after that. And that's just how blatant and flagrant it is. And so what we have to do is be able to take on those interests. We have to require federal regulators to come in and intervene in places like Texas. Just like in the civil rights movement, we needed intervention in the South from the federal government to guarantee federal rights on issues of climate change. We're going to need that kind of intervention and support. Federal regulators were kicked out of Texas before this winter storm, and we need that kind of federal oversight. We need to connect the Texas grid to the rest of the country so that when other places have these kinds of storms, we can help from Texas. And when we need help, we can get that help. One big city in Texas that is connected to the outside grid is El Paso. And in El Paso, they could get energy from Nevada and from New Mexico. And so they did not have the power go out in the ways that those of us in Austin and Houston and Dallas and San Antonio did. So no, the answer to your question is we are not at a place where we have that guarantee, and we need to get there. And that's part of why we need your help. That's parts of the stakes in this race. I don't take fossil fuel executive or PAC money from fossil fuel corporations. My next most leading opponent has a long history of taking large contributions from that industry. And that's one of the big divisions in this race that y'all can help me with.
Thank you.
Jane, thank you so much for the question. Greg, thank you for the thoughtful response. Okay, up next, we are going to go to our friend Ed Trever. Ed, will you please unmute yourself and share with folks where you're joining us from and what your question is for Greg?
I'm joining you from Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of DC. I do have a cousin in Austin and who's got family. And I just listened to a Zoom session from Common Cause, and I did want to mention that Steph Gomez was mentioning problems with Republicans pushing it, making it harder for voters in Texas. But my question basically is on as one person in Congress, how do you go about improving or decreasing the income and wealth inequality?
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't know whether the right thing would be to run for Congress until pretty recently, right? Because on the city council, you can make immediate change to people's lives. But I think it's been so proven lately by new young progressives in Congress that one voice really makes a huge difference. Such an incredible example, Representative Cori Bush, freshman legislator in Congress. When it looked like the eviction moratorium was not going to be extended by the president, she went and slept on the Capitol steps. Of course, she had tons of support from other people, but she really led that movement. Sleeping there, you had new members of Congress coming, suddenly a national movement. And what do you know? Then the president extends the eviction moratorium and keeps thousands of people in their homes. She didn't have to negotiate with Joe Manchin or Mitch McConnell. She didn't have to wait a decade or two to work her way up the committee chairmanship totem pole. She just went out there and did the right thing and changed the lives of people, not just in her district, but across the country. I think people like AOC have done that on issues like student debt. I think being able to stand up is something that freshman members of Congress have a track record now of being able to do. And it makes me ask myself, what would it be like if we had a dozen or 24 more people that were willing to do that? And so I want to be able to do that, and then to get more people in the door in other parts of the country that are willing to do the same. Also in places like Texas, you're seeing now Starbucks workers organizing and unionizing, just inspired by people in other parts of the country. But of course, they face even greater intimidation and consequences in anti-worker environments like Texas. So I know the power before of using my city council letterhead of having 100,000 population area of my community. Now, as a member of Congress, I think being on that picket line and standing up for folks does make a real difference. Because if we're able to unionize some of those Starbucks in Texas, then that has a potential to change not just Starbucks workers' lives, but the entire service industry and restaurant industry. And so I think I'm really committed to not just being one of 435 who show up and vote, but pulling my weight as a leader in the labor movement and a leader in trying to close the runaway inequality we see in the country.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for the question. Okay, up next, let's keep it rolling. Up next, let's go to our friend Phil Villers. Phil, will you share with folks where you're joining from and ask Greg your question, please? Oh, Phil, you're on mute.
Hi, I'm in Concord, Massachusetts. And what I'd like to ask you about is an issue which is very important in Texas and other places. What should we do about our immigration policy to make it consistent with our values, including asylum?
Thank you so much. That is such a critical question for our whole country and for all of us here in Texas. We have strayed so far away from what our values are and what I believe the values of everyday people should be in this country on issues of immigrant rights. And what needs to be done are we need to push the administration to live up to our baseline values. There's so much we can do on the administrative side. What we saw with people here from Haiti seeking asylum was just totally wrong. And that is something where you don't need, again, Mitch McConnell or Joe Manchin to sign off on it for the administration to do better by people seeking asylum, I believe. And that is a fundamental right. That is, when we bring in asylum seekers, we are all better off. It's something that makes Texas a wonderful place to accept people in our country and to recognize that actually by investing in them and by investing in border communities and investing in our communities that are the frontline places, welcoming people, we all do better. So I believe that there needs to be real fundamental shift in the way that the administration is handling this issue. It shouldn't be seen as a political liability. Instead, it's a human issue, but it's something where we actually wind up being better off investing in people rather than investing in detention centers or continuing Trump's policies of things like remaining on the other side of the border. But then on the legislative front, it has to be a key priority. We are think about voter suppression in lots of ways. I believe that things like the For the People Act, John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, critically important. The voter suppression we're seeing with mail-in ballots being rejected, mail-in ballot applications being rejected at 30-40% in Texas, horrible. But something we don't talk enough about, I think, is that the greatest voter suppression I see in places like Texas is the lack of comprehensive immigration reform that has not occurred in so long. I just went to one of my PTA meetings, the most civically engaged parents in my district at these PTAs, where almost not a single mom or dad is given the right to vote, even though so many of them have lived in this district longer than I have been alive. But we have accepted having people work in this community, sometimes employers taking advantage of people in this community, people sending their kids in this community, strengthening it, and then being denied the basic rights to vote. And by not giving people that pathway to citizenship, we continue to disenfranchise people and not live up to our baseline values. So of course, we need to halt the deportations and separations of so many of our families. We need to end the private prison industry in our country. We need to change how the administration treats people at the border, accept people as asylum seekers, whether you are black, white, or brown, but then fundamentally give people the power to have a full voice in their democracy, which I think is just a critical thing for us to do for immigrant communities. I see it every day here in Texas, millions of people whose political rights have been stripped of them by being given the label undocumented, when really they're just the person next door who is being labeled that way by federal inaction.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil, for the question. Thank you, Greg. I want to try and bring in some folks who are joining us online too. Greg, Paul asks, can you share your thoughts on, how do you connect and talk to middle income white folks and share with them that progressive policies are good for them and the best hope for them and their kids? Can you share some of your thinking on that?
Yeah, I think that these last couple of years have shown us that we actually all rely on one another. And I think Philippe was mentioning he's calling in from Massachusetts. The spot I'm sitting right now, there was just a milk crate right where I'm sitting. We had to move this chair to put a milk crate here for Senator Warren to be standing on here yesterday. She was just here campaigning with me in this same, my little campaign office coffee shop. And I remember her having a video that I watched about a dozen times when I was first running for city council, where she explained that none of us make it on our own. Did you drive here on a road? Or if you have a small business, did you ship it and did it get on a truck or did it fly on an airplane? Or did, people that are making money, did they turn on a tap for water? How did that all work? The fact is we all rely on each other. And we've seen in Texas, when this electric grid failure happened, how it was the people working on power lines that were getting the electricity back up, that it was bus drivers who didn't have power at their own homes, who were leaving their family under blankets to volunteer to drive a bus to help get people's parents and grandparents out of retired living homes who were stranded there, to get them to our local high school where they could have food and water and warmth and not die in the cold. we really saw how we all rely on each other. And so I think through the pandemic, through these storms, we've better shown that we need to be able to take care of essential workers, take care of working people, take care of our infrastructure, and invest in one another. And that this democracy is how we care for one another. And that when we don't invest in that democracy, things really do and can fall apart. And so that's been the real core message. And then the second message is just how much the people that are really in the corporations that are getting away with the most, how that isn't helping anybody. Because even, middle class and even upper middle class folks in my district, it's a working class district, but we have people all across the income range can't get access to childcare, or they're wondering why the schools, don't have the level of teachers that, increasing class sizes, for example. Those sorts of things can be addressed if the Elon Musks of the world would just pay a sliver of their fair share. One of the most popular things I did citywide in this city when I was on the city council, we were getting people who said, I've disagreed with you about so much, but I'm so glad you did this, was we closed a 100-year-old loophole on our lakefront on some of the most luxury and expensive properties in the entire state. They had a special loophole written just for them that had been re-ratified 30 years ago, 100-year-old loophole where they paid zero in city taxes, where middle income or even some upper income people had been regularly paying for police and fire and EMS and health clinics and schools. And these folks would have been paying nothing just because of their economic and political power. And so in going and closing that loophole, so everybody else could pay just a little less and have a little better services, we had folks, frankly, in Republican areas who were writing thank you notes because it's just, and we know that's happening at the highest levels of corporations like Amazon. And so bringing some of those folks in with some baseline economic populism, and then recognizing that we're actually all in this together. I think those are kind of the two messages we're using to build a broad coalition that includes, more moderate and independent people, because we got to bring everybody together that we can, but behind some values.
Greg,
Cliff, I'm glad you know the video I'm talking about.
Greg, thank you for that beautiful answer. Okay, I'm going to kick it back to our co-founder, Stephanie Taylor, for one final question.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And thank you to everyone for these great questions, and to Greg for your wonderful answers. I hope that everybody saw on this call why we need Greg in Congress. He is an authentic voice, he is a rare talent, and he is a real fighter for working people. So please do chip into this race if you have a chance. It's going to really make a difference in this race. It's going to go far. And speaking of that, Greg, I have one last question for you, which is, how will the money you are raising right now help you win?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. So right now, as I mentioned at the top of the call, we know we're probably in the mid 40s. And we've got to get to 50% plus one to get the campaign done. And so we have a baseline campaign budget, but I just added a chunk more to bring on more field canvassers, add more field hours, and have more people who are volunteers use our dialer, which costs us some money, to squeeze out that last bit of turnout. Because we want to win on Tuesday so that everybody here can go work on all those other races we're all committed to working on. We want to be able to send a strong message on Tuesday. So every cent you put in is going to go turn out progressive voters who are feeling a little disillusioned right now by what's happening in DC. So we want to send them a little message of hope, get them to the polls and get this thing done on Tuesday. We've seen, right, that we are seeing big corporate spending on the other side. I know our police association, which is so anti-police reform that I've had it out for me since I was 24 years old, are putting in big spending. They're trying to get their last tranche of voters out. And if we can get a few more out, it's a huge help. So anything you can chip in. We also have virtual phone banks every single day that people can participate in virtually. And we know we can bring progressive change right here from the heart of Texas. And if we can get that done here in Texas, I hope that inspires folks all over this country. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this movement with you guys, no matter what. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Greg. Folks, thank you so much. I'll share someone in the chat. Our friend Robert Frame said, Greg reminds me of a Paul Wellstone. So cheers to that. And folks, let's go ahead. If we could ever use a little bit of something to make us feel a little bit more in this together and a little bit warmer. Can everyone go ahead and unmute themselves and let's all say bye to each other. Let's say bye to Greg. Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. But to all of you on the line, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Namaste.
Thank you, Greg.
Bye,
Appreciate
y'all.
it.
Very much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Si se puede.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.
Sí se puede.
Adios.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Phil. Bye, Ed. Bye, Jane. Thank you.
Bye, Rachel.
Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Bye.